RBI कहता है जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. I have with me a very special guest, the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Luxembourg, Jean Asselborn, to talk about bilateral, regional and global issues of interest or concern to both Luxembourg and India. Mr. Minister, thank you for making time to be on DD India. Appreciate it.
Please, it's an honor for me.
Great. Now, Minister needs no introduction, but for those of you who might not be familiar with Luxembourg or the Minister himself, he has held the posts of Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister in the past as well. And after the election in October 2018, he was once again appointed as the Foreign Minister on the 5th of December 2018. And he holds diverse portfolios. He is not only the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, he also holds the portfolio of the Minister of Immigration and Asylum as well. And interestingly, he is currently the longest serving foreign minister in Europe. That's quite a distinction, Mr. Minister.
I don't know if it is a distinction, it's a fact.
Indeed.
I think I am the longest serving minister in the European Union since 2010. Moratinos was the Spanish minister, was the last. And then from 2010 till now, I am the longest serving minister.
Interesting. And before, Mr. Minister, before I dive straight into the bilateral aspects of the relationship, I want to run our viewers through Luxembourg and its people and government. Now, Luxembourg, for those of you who might not be familiar with, is a European country. It has three neighbors, Germany, France and Belgium. It is a constitutional monarchy and its area is slightly smaller than the Indian state of Goa. It has a population of only less than 700,000 people only. Right, Mr. Minister, if I can get down to the questions now. Let's start with your visit to India. Who all did you meet in New Delhi and how did those talks go and what did you discuss with the Indian leadership?
I met above all this morning my colleague, the Foreign Minister. Went very well. We know us since a few months. We saw us in another country. So for me it was very interesting to come at this moment to India. We have an embassy here. India has not yet an embassy in Luxembourg. The embassy is in Brussels. So I will also push that our links will be tougher in the future if India would also open an embassy in Luxembourg, but that's for the future.
Mr. Minister, you spoke about the Embassy of Luxembourg in India. So just to bring our viewers up to speed with the latest on that count, Luxembourg opened its embassy in New Delhi in 2002 and has 3 honorary consulates in Chennai, Kolkata and Mumbai. Right, and getting down to the bilateral aspect of the visit, Mr. Minister, are any visits planned between Luxembourg and India, and are we looking forward to better ties insofar as trade, investment, people-to-people ties go?
I think that in this globalized world, it's not only economy, but it's also economy and it's political links. I think that there is a possibility that our Grand Duke will visit in the next months India. I think I am here above all because we have this Luxembourgish Indian links or interests. But as you said it, I am also a minister of one of the founding members of the European Union. So there is a lot to talk about European Union and India. And I can tell you, we had a meeting of the foreign ministers in January, and everybody said, all the foreign ministers said, Asia is interesting for us, that's clear, but Asia is not only one country. There is also another very, very, very important country. So I think we have really to strengthen the relations between European Union and India, because we are both of us, European Union and India, are the largest parliamentarian democracies in the world. So already this is a very, very important point.
And talking about the ties in the context of the European Union, Mr. Minister, how do you see Luxembourg-India ties bilaterally and in the multilateral context under the purview of the India-European Union relationship?
You know that we have, our diplomatic relations go back to 71 years already. So, secondly, you know, maybe that you know that from Luxembourg, the blast furnaces for the steel industry had been built by Luxembourgers. Paul Wurth is a very important company in Luxembourg, and in the last decades, from Luxembourg, this steel industry has been built partly in India. That's one thing. The other thing, maybe that you know the name ArcelorMittal, so the second name you know what it is. They have a very big steel factory, steel company, and they have the headquarter in Luxembourg. And we have also Tata Steel is also present in Luxembourg. So there are very, very deep links, economic links, but I think that we can do better on the political side, and that's why I am here. I think this visit this morning here will push us to more and to better cooperation.
And talking about the EU-India relationship, Mr. Minister, on 13th of March, Prime Minister Modi will travel to Brussels for the 15th EU-India summit. Did you discuss this with the Indian ministers, for instance, and what might be on the agenda of that summit per se?
Yes, I think this visit of Prime Minister Modi is very important. But before, in February already, we will have the visit of the foreign minister.
Right.
In Brussels, he was invited by Borrell, who is the High Representative now, and he will be, I think, in the mid of February already in Brussels. And then the second step is the summit I think in March, and this is very important. We know that we have in petto, if I can say, this free trade agreement negotiations that had been stopped a few years ago, but I think the moment is now very, very clear for us and for you. After all these difficult relations between the United States and China and the United States and the European Union, I think that European Union and India, they can show that we go forward, and we don't like, let's say, this all this politics to isolate countries, and we are for free trade in Europe and in India, and I think we have to manage this in a good direction.
And when we talk about the European Union, Mr. Minister, one issue that's dominated the attention, at least here in India, is the decision by the European Parliament to talk about an issue which India sees as its own internal matter. Now, from your perspective, from the perspective of Luxembourg, how do you view this situation, especially given the fact, as you mentioned, that the 15th EU-India summit will take place just a couple of months later?
This was a very important part of our discussion this morning with my colleague, and my friend, the minister here. I think, to be very clear, I don't want to interfere in Indian policy, that's clear. And we know in Europe what migration means. If migration is mixed also with religion, it's always very, very difficult. It's the emotional aspect. It's not always rational. And when I understood is this in this region of Amas, the idea is not to increase the number of stateless people. Right. And I think there is a first decision, and I think that India knows that there must be also a second decision. You know, all the international conventions, they are against increasing the number of stateless people. And here in India, the government, they know it, and I think there must be a solution, found a solution on this. Yes, the European Parliament, you mentioned it. You know, Europe is a complex machinery. And you know, the European Parliament is totally free. It's not the Commission, it's not the Council, it's not the Court of Justice. There are political families, and they take their decisions, they negotiate, they discuss, and they take conclusions. So this will be critical, that can be, but You have to know here in India that the European Parliament is very, very often very critical against the own member states in the European Union. If, for instance, something goes going wrong with political solidarity or with rule of law. So let's see. I don't think that the doors will be closed. And the foreign minister told me that he is ready to come to Brussels to speak with us in the Council, with the foreign ministers, but also speak with the European Parliament. And this is the good way to have an exchange of arguments. And then I think we are two democracies, as you said. Nobody is perfect in Europe, nobody is perfect here. And on migration, we have our own experience, and I can tell you also in Europe, to make the difference between those who need protection and those who are economic migrants. Also, this problem in Europe too is not solved.
But just a quick
that's something. It's a challenge.
But just a quick follow-up question, Mr. Minister. Yeah. When you talk about the European Parliament, now this law was passed by the Indian Parliament. So there is a view in New Delhi that it is unfair or improper for another legislature to comment or sit in judgment over another country's legislature, number one. And number two, India maintains that the Act deals with only those persecuted minorities from 3 specific countries. So there's a clear focus and a reason and a logic as to why this Act was enacted. So did you discuss these issues with the Indian leaders?
Yes, but the European Parliament, as I told you, is not linked with the Council, not linked with the Commission. The Commission cannot interfere in this discussion. They are elected by the people. It's a political body, and they take their decisions. So we have to accept this in Europe and also outside the European Union. Now, I think that the European Parliament is not a parliament that refuses to exchange arguments. And here I think it will be fine if the minister and also the prime minister comes to Europe and comes to Brussels or to Strasbourg and to make this exchange of. So I don't want to say that everything is correct, and I don't want to say that everything is wrong, certainly not. What I said this morning, and the minister, I think that he understood me, if the result is that we increase the number of stateless people, there you have to find, and if we can help, we do it, a solution.
Mr. Minister, another issue of concern to democracies everywhere is terrorism. Now, India says India is a victim of terrorism emanating from its neighborhood. So how seriously is the European Union and Luxembourg in particular approaching this issue of combating terrorism and counter-terrorism capabilities in both EU and in India?
But you know, terrorism is not only in India. We suffered a lot in Europe, in France, in Belgium, in other places. So everything what can be done in the cooperation between the big countries inside the European Union, but also with partners like India, we have to do it. We have to exchange our services, have to exchange the informations, and it's a fight. Yes, it's a fight for freedom. It's a fight for our young people. I think terrorism is something that can, nothing is planned, and it can happen every day in Europe or in India, and here we have to work together.
Mr. Minister, when we talk about the European Union, one can't help but talk about Brexit as well. Now, has Luxembourg and the European Union as a whole considered life after Brexit, and what might be the future for EU as we know it after the UK leaves the European Union?
So there will be life in the European Union after Brexit. We lose 67 million people in the European Union. We lose a member of the Security Council. We lose 15% of our GDP in the European Union. That's a fact. So there will be no winner on one side or on the other side. What we have to do now is, okay, next 1st of February, Brexit will be done. Right. First act, second act has to follow.
Right.
So, and we have only 11 months to negotiate, let's say, a free trade agreement and to ratify it. So it's in a very short time. We have to see how it can work. I think that both sides, they are aware of this. Mr. Barnier will be in Luxembourg in the next days. We will discuss with him. We will have the first meeting of the General Affairs Council. We will prepare it. The European Council will do its best, I think. We have an interest. Life has to continue, but the common market is no more an open market for the Brits. That's clear. But there we have to maintain. We don't want taxes, tariffs. We don't want to have dumping, and we don't keep a level playing field and a good cooperation with the Brits after Brexit. So it's you remember it was the 23rd June 2016, and we are now 2020. So we needed 3.5 years to come to a first step of this Brexit. It's the first time in history of the European Union that we lose a member around the table. First time.
But you think the idea of European Union is still valid and will remain valid in the years to come?
Yes.
Or you think that's an idea whose time has come and gone?
No. With Brexit, the European Union will not die. That's clear.
So should it
we will
reinvent
suffer.
itself? Reinvent itself?
We have to reinvent us every day.
But would new members be welcome from Luxembourg's perspective? For instance, Merkel has spoken about starting talks with Albania. There is Turkey's foreign minister has spoken about how Turkey wants to restart or give momentum to those talks. So is Luxembourg open to the idea of enlarging the EU going forward?
We had always been for a double track, deepening and opening. You know that we have a debate now, for instance, France, they say first we have to deepen and then enlarge. I think that the Balkan countries, that's our garden. That's the garden of the European Union. It's not the garden of Turkey or the garden of, I don't know, Russia or China or Saudi Arabia. It's our garden. And we have to find a solution for all these countries. In 2003 in Saloniki we said everybody who is fulfilling the conditions can enter the European Union. So I think here we have to go on. It's difficult, really difficult, but it's our challenge on the Balkans. With Turkey, I think at this moment it's a little bit complicated. We have to fight for human rights, for rule of law, also in Turkey, and at this moment I can tell you the negotiations are really on ice. There is, at this moment, it can change, but that depends also from our friends in Turkey.
Let's talk a bit about, Mr. Minister, if you will, about the situation in the Middle East, or as West Asia, as Indians call it. President Trump has spoken about the so-called deal of the century. What's your take on the situation there, given the fact that many countries in the region, including Palestine, including Jordan, have all opposed this idea of a deal brokered or proposed by the US?
Deal of the century is a little bit a big expression. I think that it is not normal, not convenient, that the destiny of Palestinians, of Palestine, is fixed in Washington without the Palestinians. That remembers me the century before, 100 years before, Sykes-Picot. The destiny of the Palestinians has to be negotiated between Palestine and Israel. So I think there is only one way. Is this solution called the deal of the century? Is it in favor of a two-state solution? And secondly, is the state of Palestine viable? If you take 1/3 from the West Bank, what will be the rest? And if really the settlement policy is not in accordance with international law, if this is now legal at a certain moment, it will not work. So you heard already the King of Jordan, who has very, very big problems. I hope that in the European Union we can persuade also the Americans that we do not have to go this way. The annexion of the Jordan Valley, for instance, is something that we cannot accept. That this is not in accordance with the resolutions of the Security Council in New York, and it is not in the logic of Oslo and of all the preparation that has been done before. We need a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine can live in dignity, side by side.
With 1967
67 borders and Jerusalem, capital of the two.
With the right to return.
Right to return, the refugees, and security measures.
Sure. Mr. Minister.
The classic parameters.
Indeed. Mr. Minister, if I can cite what you said recently, you spoke about the need to recognize a Palestinian state after the US supported the Israeli settlements in occupied West Bank. Is that still very much on the table as far as you and the EU are concerned?
We had a discussion, to be very brief. It's very difficult, a very, very difficult question. You see, historically, the Germans, they have a lot of problems to go this way. We have hesitations. There is no consensus still. But I think my idea was we have to say to the world that if we want a two-state solution, we also have to define what is the second state. We know what Israel is, but we never know, but we don't know as European Union what Palestine is. Some members of the European Union, they recognized Palestine more than 20 or 30 years before. In 88 they recognized. So that's not the problem. The problem is that if really in the West Bank the settlements would be accepted as legal, then physically a two-state solution is impossible.
Let's talk about another country, Mr. Minister, in the region, especially in the Gulf, Iran. Now, in the light of the recent Iran-US tensions, Iran says the EU has reneged on its commitments under the JCPOA or the nuclear deal. And you have in the past said, if I can quote you, I am convinced, as I was 16 years ago, that you really should not make the mistake of believing that you can solve a problem in the Middle East with weapons, unquote.
That was not so wrong.
So in the light of what's happened recently, what's the way forward as far as the EU is concerned vis-a-vis Iran?
Iran, yes. First, we tried during 12, 13 years, till 2015, to have an agreement that Iran will not have the nuclear weapon. And the counterpart is open the doors for the economy with Iran. So it's very difficult to understand why President Trump destroyed this. Maybe he destroyed it because it was done by President Obama. Maybe. I don't know. But the consequences, they are very, very negative. Very negative. If in Iran the enrichment will start again, and if Iran comes to a nuclear weapon, you will see a proliferation of nuclear weapons in this region. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, they could say if they have the nuclear weapon, we want also
North Korea, maybe?
Yeah, but North Korea, that's a little bit far away. So no, and that was our aim, the only aim, and it was on the table, it was destroyed. It's very difficult to maintain it. You know that this internal dispute mechanism is now launched by France, UK. We are still, UK and Germany, we are still in the GCPOA. We are not yet in the Security Council. I hope that, yes, that Iran, they help us also not to go directly in the wrong direction. That would be also very, very difficult for the European Union, because the European Union had the lead of this negotiation. It was a negotiation between Iran and the United States, but we, with China and with Russia. So it's, yes, it's a very bad situation now there, and you saw also the context between Iran and Iraq, all these tensions. You have Libya. So I don't think really what I said at this moment, that you can solve any problem in the Middle East, in this region, with weapons. That's impossible. So therefore we need maybe in the region something that I would call a Helsinki process. You know, during the Cold War it was possible to put this Helsinki process with United States, Russia and European and Europe on the table, and it must be possible to do the same between the Gulf states, with Iran and with Russia, United States, Europe. That's something that I think we have to put on the table.
There's another country east of Iran, Mr. Minister, and that's Afghanistan. And the situation there is of some concern to countries in the region, including India. The elections have been held, talks are happening with the Taliban and the US. How do you see the situation there? And Afghanistan, if you ask the Afghan leaders, they say we are subjected to terrorism emanating from their neighborhood. So how do you approach the issue of terrorism in Afghanistan's context? Is Pakistan a part of the problem or solution in Afghanistan?
I don't want to mention now. I know I am in India. I was in Pakistan too. I think that I was in Afghanistan also last year in Omar Sharif. So a lot of blood was lost in Afghanistan. European countries and Afghan people, all people of this region here. Now, it seems that President Gandhi is re-elected. That seems to be clear. It seems also to be clear that in Doha, these negotiations, at a certain moment they had been blocked. I don't know. I hope that they can continue with the Taliban. I can really not understand a country. I was several times in the last decade in Afghanistan, but the situation that I saw in 2018 in Kabul was worse than it was in 2005. Worse. And therefore, we have to help this country to avoid that weapons are coming in, and also the mentality. I cannot understand really why people call Talibans. They are, yes, the only reason to be there is to kill people and to make terror acts.
So why would you negotiate with terrorists, people who kill civilians?
Listen, yes, I am now an optimist. I said once, we have peace in Afghanistan if Talibans are member of the government. You understand what I wanted to say? And other colleagues said it too. If Talibans consider themselves as part of a democratic Afghanistan, member of the government, then the war is won, but we are not there, unfortunately.
And one last question, since we're talking about Afghanistan, Mr. Minister, and that's to do with NATO. Now, President Trump, rather candidate Trump, spoke about NATO as being quote-unquote obsolete. President Emmanuel Macron of France has said that NATO is brain dead. How would you describe NATO as it exists today?
Difficult question, but I think NATO is a defensive pact. And I give you an example where we are as NATO also today very important. Take Iraq. We are as NATO in Iraq to train people there, security forces, that they are able to fight against terrorists and to maintain the stability in this country. Here, NATO can, with a few hundred soldiers, officers, can bring stability to a country. Okay, we know what happens to these days in Iraq, but that's how I see one of the mandates of NATO, to bring stability, peace, and to give the means to a country that they are in a possibility to defend themselves.
Mr. Minister, on that note, thank you so much for making time to be with us and speak to DD India. Appreciate it.
I thank you. It was very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate
it was an honor for me.